Hey guys, welcome to another review. Yes, this one is going to be a bit on the lengthy side because I got a lot to say. Now, I just want to clarify before I get into today's review, I am a fan of the Conjuring universe. But even though I'm a fan, that doesn't mean I'm going to like every film in said universe. And if I spot a flaw or continuity issue or any other type of issue, because I like the universe so much, those things really tick me off. Probably if I wasn't someone who was a stickler for those things, and also if I wasn't that big a fan of the Conjuring universe, I probably wouldn't care, and there's a chance I might not even notice them. But because I'm a fan, I do notice these things, so they are an issue for me. But at the end of the day, I'm still a fan of the universe. I think James Wan has created something brilliant, and I am looking forward to seeing more films. I've read so many of the Warren cases, and there are so many really interesting ones that I think would be great subjects for films. I think it was the Donovan case. I might be getting that name wrong. I definitely know it starts with a D. I think it's Donovan, but don't quote me. I'd have to go and get out my book. I remember what I was reading about all that, the details, the photos that I saw. It looked like just such an intense thing, and there are things that occurred during that investigation that, in terms of the films, have not been depicted yet on screen. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that they could really work with if they selected that one. I will mention in this review, in relation to this film, what people think might be the subject of The Conjuring 3. On account of what's happened in this film, I really hope it's not. And even without this film, I also really hope it's not, simply because if it's going to look how it does in this film, then we're just moving into a territory of ridiculousness that just doesn't feel real. But that's the whole other story. So I'm gonna stop talking about this stuff and start talking about Annabelle Comes Home. Annabelle Comes Home is a 2019 American supernatural horror film directed by Gary Doberman in his directorial debut, with a screenplay by Doberman from a story by Doberman and James Wan. It is a sequel to 2014's Annabelle and is the 7th installment in the Conjuring universe. While babysitting the daughter of Ed and Lorraine Warren, a teenager and her friend unknowingly awaken an evil spirit trapped in a doll. I'm gonna start with the positives because there are so many negatives, people might not make it long enough to find where the positives are. I knew I would have issues with this film, I knew it would have problems, and I knew the plot was going to be a mess, but not even my movie oracle skills could prepare me for this nun-level shitstorm. But as I said, let us begin with the positives. Performances across the board were brilliant. McKenna Grace, Madison Iseman, and Katie Sarif did a terrific job. Iseman and Sarif displayed just the right amount of skepticism and believability to sell the performance, and Grace nailed it as a young girl who is all too aware of what goes bump in the night, but too young to understand how to fight it, but she sure does a damn good job. I enjoyed the dynamic of these three characters. Mary Ellen and Judy have a charming bond that is more like sisters than babysitter and sittee. I love that they are close instead of a story about some moronic and cold babysitter who treats kids like dirt. I was not a fan of the character of Daniela, as she is written as one of my most hated tropes, but she has some solid motivations at least, and some aspects that do make the character redeemable, but only to a certain degree. In his directorial debut, Gary Doberman did a great job. I would say he has proved to be a far greater talent behind a camera than he is on paper, and I will get to that. For the most part, there were some great shots and use of keeping certain characters in the frame to a degree where they appear like something out the corner of your eye, though I did feel when it came time to focus on the characters or beings in question, the shots lingered for too long and the moment became boring quite quickly. But for a debut, I think he did a solid solid job and has demonstrated he has some legit directing chops. The score, which is once again provided by Joseph Bashara, works perfectly with this film. It's soft and subtle and lingers gently in the background, and the notes hit all the right moments in the film and aren't too exaggerated where they take over. It was a perfect musical accompaniment to the film, and I was very impressed. It was great having Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson return again to their respective roles. I wish we had seen them in the film more, but what can you do? Here is where my positive critiques of the film end and the negative onslaught begins. If you don't like listening to blunt and brutal reviews, then stop listening now. Yes, did I mention this as a Kill It With Fire review? Oh, I didn't? Well, now you know. As I hinted at earlier, this movie none level fucked up, and it didn't stop fucking up until the credits started to roll. I knew this film would be bad and have errors for the simple fact that it was written by Gary Doberman. Now please understand, I have nothing against this man. I'm sure he is a wonderful person. I wouldn't know as I've never met him, but I'm very familiar with his work, and it wasn't until I watched Annabelle Creation that I realized I have hated almost every film he has written, and I have disliked them because of how they were written. Annabelle from 2014, Within from 2016, Wolves at the Door from 2016, Annabelle Creation from 2017, It from 2017, and The Nun from 2018, and now Annabelle Comes Home. I love the Conjuring franchise, and the only films in it I haven't liked were written by Gary Doberman. Coincidence? I think not. Now the worst for me was The Nun, as that film was filled to the brim and more with plot hole, timeline screw-ups, and even basic mythos screw-ups, and when you're dealing with a franchise, and especially one of this nature, I believe those are elements that are not okay to mess up. I'm going to attempt to keep my train of thought straight, but much like the plot, I think I'm going to be all over the place, so bear with me. The film opens with the same scene that opens The Conjuring, and from there it moves forward. This scene is the only accurate depiction of the real Annabelle story, but with one minor difference. In real life, it was the young women who asked the Warrens to get rid of the doll and not the Warrens who requested to take the doll. For the longest time, I had hoped at least one of the Annabelle films would base its events on the real Annabelle story, but this one scene is as far as we got. As this film progressed, it again came close to depicting the real story, but once again we're just shy of it. In the film, we see Ed and Lorraine driving home with the doll. During their journey, the entity that is latched to the doll sabotages their car, outside a cemetery no less. The doll acts as a beacon, calling forth spirits from the grave who attack and try to kill Ed. In the real story, during their journey, Ed lost control of the wheel numerous times and nearly had a crash due to an unseen force messing with his recently maintained car. He proceeded to pull over, get out and bless the doll, and the journey continued with no issue. I believe the film could have depicted this and did not need to go so overboard. The repeated use of fog, for example, was dramatic and hilariously stupid. Despite the opening scene once again stating that the doll is not possessed, throughout the film and even the synopsis, the characters continue to treat the doll as such and make statements claiming it is the doll doing these things when it isn't. The doll itself has no power, but the entity attached to it does, and it refuses to let go because the doll keeps it tethered where it wants to be. The demon spends the entire film trying to possess someone, supposedly awaking all the spirits and entities in the house to do its dirty work. This breaks away from the mythos. For one, this all happens in a single evening. The Conjuring films have stated that possession comes in stages and it takes time. It takes time to break down and weaken the intended victim until they are in a place where they are vulnerable to possession. But this film has depicted this as a case of a demon going, I'll just scare the shit out of everyone and won't be a problem. This is the first time in the Annabelle films to depict and showcase the demon in all its demon glory. Now the other films hinted at it or showed us a figure in the shadows, but this film has a demon flat out on the screen and it doesn't go away or disappear. This was utterly stupid and also goes against the mythos. Again, the previous films establish, much like in reality, that demons work in anonymity, something Doberman has forgotten. They never show their real face, though it is likely they would show a very typical demon face because who would ever believe that? In fact, Ed and Lorraine retold a story of a demon encounter, and in it they said the demon showed itself as a giant beast with horns and hooves, presenting itself as what many picture the devil to look like. The person they were telling this to laughed and didn't believe them, which is when Lorraine explained that is why it did it. It showed itself in a form that was so absurd no one would ever believe it. Lorraine herself said she has only ever glimpsed the real face of the demonic and never seen it entirely, but words cannot describe what she saw in those glimpses, though she did describe it as almost reptilian, but that wasn't even a close enough description in her eyes. So while I would love to say that as mythology decrees, this demon is presenting itself in an unbelievable form on purpose, I don't believe that is the case, as these films just clearly want a demon who looks like a stereotypical demon, and in my humble opinion, going so stereotypical makes it feel like a caricature and was making me think of Scooby-Doo, the live action movie. We even see the demon trying to suck out Judy's soul. Demons don't suck out souls, they possess people. It's as though suddenly this demon became a Dementor and was going around trying to give Judy the Dementor's kiss. Staying in Scooby territory, this film bombards the audience with every physical manifestation of every item in the Warrens' home, and it is a full-on paranormal onslaught, and it's overkill. A cursed wedding gown, a tainted doll, coins worn by the dead, and a werewolf. This film has everything. Now, in real life, Lorraine would say that before ever touching the doll, she would bless herself with holy water and the doll, because the doll is indeed a beacon for negative energy, not necessarily other spirits, and that it does feed off your energy, so to prevent that, she would bless them both to create a safe barrier. If you use this logic, then it would make sense as to why everything in the Warrens' home went nuts. A young girl with no care or understanding of things around her called out spirits to communicate and then basically fed them her energy by touching them. She called and they answered. So if we look at the story through that lens, it makes sense, though again the extent was overkill, but that's not what the film tells us. The film states that it's the doll commanding these spirits, and that's not accurate to the franchise. Now let's speak about some of the entities involved in the onslaught. The ferryman, how this entity was depicted when alone was brilliant and effective, but when he's with his posse, we move into insidious territory. The ferryman and his victims and how they were shown on screen were very much like how Insidious, also starring Patrick Wilson, depicted The Further, just lines of spirits waiting to jump out at you. In the context of Insidious, it made sense. In this, it did not. Next, we have the game board. Now, while we saw the first shot of the game board in the Warrens' occult room, Daniela never actually touched it, so the sudden use of it and making it appear during other moments in the film felt entirely unnecessary. But let us move on to one of the big blunders of the film, the Hellhound from Essex. Yes, this film depicts a werewolf that is chasing Mary Ellen's love interest, the poor guy, and it attacks Judy. Now, this is not a real werewolf and is based on the Warrens' case, The Werewolf of Southend, which was about a demon that presented itself in the form of a werewolf, because again, who would believe that? Now, as far as I can tell, the character didn't touch anything associated with the being, but as many suspect, this entity may be the basis for the next Conjuring film, and so perhaps she did. However, allow me to explain how the inclusion of this entity is not only stupid for the film, but messes up the timeline. The start of the film is set in 1968. After a few minutes, a lower third title tells us the story has jumped to 1 year later. Wikipedia says the story jumps 4 years, but the writing on the screen in the movie says 1 year. This means the film takes place in 1969. However, the Warrens didn't investigate the Werewolf of Southend until the 80s, so not only would no artifact belonging to this entity exist in their home, it wouldn't exist at all. So there we have our first big mess up, the film depicting a case that has not occurred yet. Well done! But that's not the only time this happens. Towards the end of the film, the camera lingers on a shot of the music box from The Conjuring. Many are familiar with this music box and how it came into the Warrens' possession during the events of that film. But this film has established that it is set in 1969 and the events of The Conjuring don't take place until 1971. So that music box should not exist in their home as they have not yet seen it. So we have two big timeline screw-ups caught on camera, but it doesn't end there. Now here is where the film takes too many liberties, one of them concerning their main character, Judy Warren. In real life, Judy Sparrow, née Warren, was born in 1950, so during the events of this film, she should actually be 19 years old. Now I can overlook them making her younger in the film, as it makes it more terrifying to see things happen to a child. But hang on. We've seen 3 depictions of Judy Warren, first in The Conjuring, then in The Conjuring 2, and now in Annabelle Comes Home. During the events of The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, Judy was played by Sterling Gerrans. During the first film, she was 9 years old, so safe to say the character was roughly around that age. Not accurate with reality, but that's not the point. In the next film, she was now 12, but as the film takes place in 1977, the character would have actually been 6 years older, making her 15, because, you know, maths. But thanks to the actress's growth spurt, she looked about the right age. Why am I saying all this? Well, because as I said, this film takes place in 1969, and yet Judy, now played by McKenna Grace, looks older than she did in the events taking place in 1971. So how can someone be 2 years younger but look older? You see, McKenna Grace is actually 13 years old and she looks her age, and the character is written as someone around that age. So having a 13-year-old actress play a role that, if going by the film's events, should be 7 years old, means this was not only a considerable casting screw-up, but a big script screw-up too. Perhaps these errors mean nothing to others, but for me they are a large foundation of the story, the universe, and its characters, and when you mess with those or write them in a way that removes continuity, then what kind of universe do you have? The timeline and events that occur in The Nun don't remotely correctly connect with the established films in the universe, and I listed those in detail. And this film is no different. Now everyone else seems to do a good job. The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2 connect and sync up very well and are written perfectly. The Curse of La Llorona ties into Annabelle and did so in a way that worked with the timeline. It seems whenever Doberman puts pen to paper, he forgets everything, including what he has written, and does as he pleases, and what ends up happening is an entire universe implodes on itself, and it gives me a headache. This film didn't mess up as much as The Nun did, I don't think, but the errors in this film are still large enough that they do directly affect the other films, and I can't forgive that. I love continuity in mythology too much. I've never heard any stories from the Warrens stating Judy inherited her mother's psychic talents, but for the sake of the film, I think it's a smart inclusion and it does make sense, but it's a plot choice that once again causes these films to be pulled further away from reality, and that's when I start to dislike them. I think The Conjuring was so successful because it was done in a way that felt very realistic, but as we go on, the films get more and more elaborate, take more liberties, embellish on the stories more, and start to look like, as I said before, the live action Scooby-Doo, where it's just monsters of ridiculous design jumping out at you all the time, and that's when things get silly. The film attempted to include a deceased priest acting as a guardian, but the priest was terrifying, he looked menacing, and his acts as guardian nearly got someone killed. So not only was he bad at his job, but he should never have been included. There was absolutely no good reason for him to be there ever. As far as I was aware, the Warrens were upstanding members of their community and on friendly terms with law officials and the church, and often had parties at their home. So having this film depict them as outcasts in the community to a degree, while very believable, I'm not sure is again in tune with the truth. I had hoped this film would depict the time in the Warrens' lives when they had just come into possession of the doll, and things would occur around their home while they were there, and perhaps even demonstrate how this entity had a hatred for men of the cloth. Sadly, I didn't get that. What I got was one of my most hated horror movie tropes ever. The character who ignores every warning, every plea, does what they want, and shit hits the fan as a result. Because that is what the film indeed was. We would sometimes have entire scenes that lasted 10 minutes that did nothing but depict Daniela showing complete disregard for someone else's home and property. She broke into a room that wasn't just locked, it was locked with several deadbolts with big "do not enter" signs, and yet that still didn't give her a clue what she was doing was bad. She touches things that, whether you believe in the paranormal or not, you shouldn't touch because they aren't yours. Then, like an idiot, she opens the Annabelle case, completely ignoring the huge sign reading, "Warning, positively, do not open." Instead, she takes this as an invitation. I accept the character's motivations, as she was grieving and feeling guilt and just wanted to speak to her father, so I am glad they had the scene at the end where Lorraine gives her that peace. But we could have had a story about a dumb girl staying over doing a seance for that very purpose instead of this. It wouldn't have been a story I loved, but I would have accepted it more than this. Not a moment went by where I didn't want to slap that character. I hate this trope and it infuriates me that films still use it. So to sum it up, they made Judy older when she should be younger, they depicted items and cases that had not even happened yet, and the story is more about everything in the Warrens' house going nuts than it is about Annabelle. I think it did have some good moments and the performances are really good, and minus a few hiccups, the directing is excellent. But when I see so many errors and plot holes and I see a universe fall apart before my eyes, no amount of positivity can make that okay. Daniela got possessed in all of 2 seconds, and it wasn't even by the entity that is trying to possess someone, and she got exorcised just as quick. If things happened that fast, there would be no point to the other films. The more I think about this film, the madder I become. I want Doberman to stop writing the scripts to these films. He has done so much damage to them that can't be repaired, and he has taken the story so far into the realm of fiction that they are losing what made them good, and that was the realism they brought to the genre. Without them, they're just dull ghost stories that make no sense. I could go on ripping this film apart because good performances, directing, and making me jump a few times weren't enough to ease my anger. If you could hear, I was getting so into it, I started to lose my voice towards the end there. So yeah, I think I've gotten out most of my frustration, but in watching this film, it did make me want to address the issues and inconsistencies in the Conjuring universe's timeline. So I have decided to do a video all about that, which I will release next month. If you want to know about the real Annabelle story, I have done a video on that in my The Story Behind series, so I'll post a link to that at the end of this video. You'll find it on the screen, so click that and go listen to it and find out what the real Annabelle story is all about. And if you want to hear me talk about in detail the issues in the Conjuring universe timeline, then keep an eye out for that video coming up. You will be able to keep an eye out for it if you are subscribed and you hit the notification bell. That way you immediately get the alert when the video goes up. But if you don't want to do that, that's perfectly fine. So, but I know a lot of people really enjoyed this film, and I can see why, because there are some really good things about it, and continuity and timeline issues aside, in terms of directing, performances, and scare quality, it is actually better than the last 2 Annabelle films. Out of the 3, it is the best. But its consistency is worse than they ever were. So it's a tough one. But anyway, I'm gonna go, so please comment down below. Tell me what you thought of this film. I know that a lot of people loved it, and that's perfectly fine. Like I said, I can see why they did, but I just can't get over the issues. So I'm gonna head off and keep an eye out for those other videos, and like I said, please go check out my Story Behind Annabelle and maybe some of the other videos in my Story Behind series. And thank you as always to my patrons, and until next time, bye!